Hello Mallards, it's Monday, and today I want to talk about a book I just finished reading. I haven't completed a book in a hot minute because I've been reading a lot of fan fiction instead, and this, I guess, technically walks the line with fan fiction, even though it's not by fan. Well, I actually do assume that the person who wrote this book actually is a Marvel fan, but it's not fan fiction. It is actual published media official canon. So this is Scott Lang's Look Out for the Little Guy. It is a book that is in Quantumania as like a thing that Scott did. He wrote this book and he's like going to signings and talking about it. And then they were like, oh yeah, we're going to release that book. Clint Barton and Bruce Banner and Stephen Strange and Sam Wilson have all given blurbs for the cover. It also has, like the author's information about Scott Lang. It's very, very much set in universe, which is really fun. I kind of expected this book to be, I guess, a retelling of canon, and that's sort of what it is. I was hoping for some other insights, some little tidbits, and let's be honest, I was really hoping that in this book we would learn that Scott Lang was a big part of creating Rogers the Musical, and that the reason the Ant-Man is in it is because he was a creative consultant. That's not in this book. It's clear from this book that Scott has sort of become a public face for the Avengers, in that he talks in this book about how Bruce and Clint asked him to write this book to like lay out everything that happened so that the regular people would know what was going on and what the truth was of the Infinity Saga. And in canon, as I've mentioned, it's become clear that Ant-Man has like just increased in visibility. There were murals of him in Ms. Marvel and a podcast appearance. He obviously has this book. And there's the fact that Ant-Man was in the Battle of New York and Rogers the Musical. So there's been a lot of fan theories, one of which I'm a big proponent of, which is that Scott Lang was willing to be public facing and tell people about his adventures in a way that other heroes weren't capable or willing to do. And it has changed kind of his view in the modern world. And I do feel like this book backs that up, at least. No one else has a published book. This book ends up being more of a study on what at least this writer views as Scott Lang's character than necessarily a rehashing or new perspective on canon events from the MCU. There's a little bit of behind the scenes sort of stuff, but mostly it reads like a synopsis of the films when it's talking about the actual MCU canon events. It's not giving me anything really new except for a little bit about what was going on in Scott's head at the time, but no sort of missing scenes, missing pieces, anything like that, which I was kind of expecting. And I'm not necessarily disappointed that it didn't happen, but it was what I thought this book was going to be. And what this book actually is more along the lines of an advice book by Scott Lang. And what I enjoy about that is that it makes everything in here actually really relatable to the real world. So rather than being so driven by the fiction that it is just fiction, it has a lot of grounding in the real world, and he's talking a lot to regular people who are not superheroes, and that's the same whether you are in the MCU or you happen to live in this world here. And a lot of his lessons and advice about seizing the moment and obviously looking out for the little guy, I think are really relevant, and I really actually enjoyed that was the perspective that this took. It talks a lot about kind of watching out for people who are feeling small and what you can do to make them feel better, and fighting against people who are acting big to the harm of others. And I think that all of those things, even though they're wrapped up in this metaphor of him being Ant-Man and how it relates to actual ants and him actually being big and small, works really, really well. And it's a fun read. It did not take me long. This book is like 220 pages, I think. It's a quick read. There's some funny stuff in there because there's like a Q&A, a letter to Cassie, and some interesting stuff like that. But I think even if you're not a fan of the MCU, I feel like there's relatable stuff in this book. If you are a fan of the MCU, just don't go in expecting it to be a lot of canon additions, and just imagine that you already exist in the MCU and you're just reading Scott Lang's book and how it would help you as a normal person. I will say the one thing that this book really didn't do was make Hope any more interesting. This man right here, Scott Lang, is in love with and dating and in a pretty long-term relationship with Hope Van Dyne. He is supposed to know her better than anybody else, like her more than anybody else, you know, except for maybe her dad. But like, he's supposed to really be into her. And she was mentioned in this book in a very surface level, in a like, gosh, Hope trained me and I love her so much and she's so strong and so brave and so great. And her suit has wings and mine doesn't. That's kind of unfair and Hank should really change that. I'm quoting from the book now. And she is a go-getter and she wants to help the environment and help people. And she's not waiting for change, she's making change. And we work together as a team. And we do that because we trust each other. But it didn't really give me that much about Hope. And I feel like that is the one thing that the Ant-Man and the Wasp section of the MCU has really lacked, is that Hope Van Dyne, who should be an interesting character with her own journey and her own characterization, has become so much just a strong part of other people's characters. And I don't mean a strong part like she has a strong part. I mean she is strong and she is the strength, the muscle part in other stories. You also like don't learn very much about the other Avengers. There's a good chapter on Nat though, and I did like that. I appreciated it. It didn't mention Yelena at all, although it did say that she had a secret family. So maybe that was what that was alluding to. But it was a really good chapter. It was some interesting stuff just about Scott and Nat's relationship. And so I did enjoy that. Overall, it's really fun. I think if you like the MCU, you'll enjoy it. And I had a great time reading it. I'm glad that I pre-ordered this book. Like, I'm glad that I purchased this. I'm excited to pass it on to a friend of mine and then send it to my brother so he can read it too. If you've read it, let me know what you think. Are you taking any of the advice from this book? Like, do you feel like you learned some great lessons from Ant-Man? Because I actually kind of did. Surprisingly. Not the story bits I wanted, but some life lessons that I probably needed. And now I'm going to edit this, probably not very much, and then go to bed. I'll see you tomorrow.